Hi, this is Laura Holyoke, and I have part one. I'm guessing this is going to be two parts because it's a little long, for the Culture Lens overview for you. So culture to an organization is really equal to personality of an individual. So it impacts an organization's employee morale, the commitment that people have in organizations, productivity, physical health, and even emotional well-being. Cultures have a huge impact on us, just like personalities do. So one way to look at culture is to think about our families and the traditions that we have in our families, how we carry things out in our families, because it endures like a personality, where climate is often tossed in there as organizational climate. Climate is more like a brief mood. It's something that stays for a while and then it leaves. Culture is made up of norms that we tend to do over and over again, so it governs behavior of members. So norms are a bit like rules, however, just very much less explicit. So if you think about your family, maybe the family that you were raised in, and how holidays, how you undertook holidays. If you celebrated holidays, how you celebrated holidays. If you, some people have certain traditions on Thanksgiving. They may play a football game. They may eat out. They may eat in. It may be a small family affair. It may be a large family affair. How are birthdays handled? Do you make a big deal out of birthdays, or do you just kind of shuffle them under? Are there cakes that are made for birthdays? So something that we tend to grow up in, the culture in our own families, when we meet somebody else, a best friend or a partner, oftentimes our family does things the normal way, and their family may do things that aren't normal. And they seem that way because they're outside of our culture. One nice thing to think about if you start a family is that you get to define your own cultures. So you get to bring in different traditions that you like and disregard the ones that you don't care for so much. So if you take, I'm going to tell a little story here. You've taken cage, and in the middle of that cage put a ladder and a bunch of bananas at the top of the ladder. Put 5 apes in the cage. The apes tend to go for the ladder and the bananas. And when they do this, you spray them all with ice cold water. None of the apes like this, so they settle down, and then they go for the ladder and the bananas again. Again, you spray them with ice cold water. They don't like being sprayed with ice cold water, so the apes do not go for the ladder and bananas again. Now shut off the cold water, and they leave the ladder and the bananas alone. Then take one of the original 5 apes and replace it with a new ape. The new ape sees the ladder and bananas and goes for the bananas. All the other apes beat that replaced ape because they don't want to be sprayed with cold water, and that ape has no understanding, has no idea why he has been beaten by the other 4 apes. Now take a second one of the original apes and replace it with a second new ape. The second new ape goes for the ladder and the bananas. And now this time, even the first replaced ape takes part in the beating of that second ape because it knows you do not go for the ladder and the bananas. As time goes on, you replace all the original apes with new apes. Every time a new ape comes in and goes for the ladder and bananas, all the replaced apes take part in that beating of the new ape because they have no idea why they're beating that new ape. However, they know that you do not go to the ladder and the bananas, and that's just what happens. And if you ask any of those apes, why do you beat this new ape when it comes in? And they would say, you know what? That's just the way we do things around here. So this is part of understanding our cultures that we're in, especially if we come into a culture that has a long history, an organization with a long history, people that have worked there for a long time. We don't understand usually why things are done a certain way, but that's culture when you bump up against something like that. So culture tends to influence what skills we acquire and what we think about in organizations. It also influences how we acquire information and skills, how things are done in that organization, when we are allowed to participate in certain activities, and then who is allowed to participate. So a little bit beyond structure. It also defines what we pay attention to, because it's well known throughout the organization what's important to the leaders, what actions that we need to take and when to take those actions, what things mean, and how to react emotionally. So if you have a group of friends that hang out a lot and you have kind of an established culture within those friends, you can have sayings or phrases that mean something within your group of friends. And you may react emotionally when a name is brought up or an incident is brought up, either laughing hysterically or whatnot. So that's part of culture in our group of friends. So in the lower right-hand corner, these two guys have these crazy hats on, and one says to the other, "I don't know how it started either. All I know is that it's part of our corporate culture." Organizational culture starts with leadership. The leadership then reinforces it, and the accumulated learning of the organizational members. So as people get brought on, or even the starting founders of an organization start with norms. You know, you do something one day, and then you do it the next day, and the next day, and that becomes a norm, and norms make up our culture. It's very powerful and implicit, and it's this set of forces that determine human behavior in organizations. It also tends to reinforce human behavior in our families. It goes deeper than the words that are used in any kind of mission statement. So the web of tacit understandings, boundaries, common language, shared expectations maintained over time by the members. So whatever continues, that is, as norms continue and they don't get changed, that's what and how culture is established. So if you can understand the culture of an organization, of a group, of a family, you can understand that organization, you can understand that group, or you can understand that family, because culture explains the incomprehensible, the irrational, that makes no sense to anybody else unless you really understand the very beginning of what happened in that organization, of what happened in that culture, of why certain norms were set. So any organization with history has a culture, like most families have cultures. Culture is a phenomenon that surrounds all of us, and we enter into different cultures, not only in organizations, but in our families, within our friends. We're a part of many different kinds of cultures. It's accumulated shared learning from the shared history that you have or that's happened before you. It implies structural stability, patterning, and integration. So notice that it just structure, if you think about our first lens that we covered, that being stable doesn't mean that it's healthy or unhealthy, but it just means that it's stable. And there's certain patterns that happen and certain integrations that have been there around for a long time. Not every group develops a culture. So if you have a group that's more short-term, or even a work group, if that work group doesn't gel, and I'm talking about even Tuckman's group formation of forming, storming, norming, and performing, just like many groups don't get to performing, not every group develops a culture. And just because a culture is developed doesn't mean that it is a healthy culture. It can be a strong or a weak culture, but even strong cultures can be unhealthy. So some central concepts. Culture plays out in our everyday behavior and everybody else's everyday behavior. It is learned, and it's learned through interaction. So if you've ever heard of the of the quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have the absolute best strategy for your organization, or that's in an organization that you work for or see. However, the culture needs to support that strategy. Otherwise, culture just eats it up and spits it out. So the culture needs to support what an organization does. So Edgar Schein, I think, is kind of the father of organizational culture, and he defines 3 different levels of culture. So the levels on the left, the first level are artifacts. And artifacts are things that you can see. There are all kinds of observable aspects in an organization. It's how people talk to one another. It's symbols. There may be authority structures. You can look at artifacts as you walk into somebody's office. It may be that they have pictures of family everywhere, that their office is very personally decorated, or you may notice that there's nothing on the person's desk, that the walls don't have anything, there's no pictures of anybody. So while you can easily see these examples and hear these examples in terms of how people talk to one another or even how people dress, they're really hard to decipher what they mean. So for example, if you were coming to visit me in my office and somebody's just leaving and they said, thank you very much, Dr. Holyoke, I appreciate it. If that's all you hear, you don't know whether they may be making a joke to me about something we just talked about. You don't know if I require everybody to call me Dr. Holyoke. So that's what I mean about easy to see, hard to decipher. So the next level of organizational culture are the espoused values. And these are values which are stated and beliefs about what should happen in an organization. So these, we say this is what we value. And sometimes, so espoused values can be the values that are in use, or they may just be espoused, what we say that we value. So they may they may be one or the other, but most organizations do have written out values, and a lot of times we tell people what our values are, and sometimes we live by those values, and sometimes we don't. So just another level of culture. The deepest level of culture are basic assumptions, and these are taken for granted ways of doing and thinking and achieving goals in the organization. We usually don't know when we are carrying these out. So when you enter an organization or just hired on in an organization, you're usually smacked by its culture because it's so different from where you've come from before, or you've never seen an organization operate like this, or a group within an organization. So it's different, and it's different because you don't know the history. You haven't learned yet how to behave. And it usually takes an individual 6 months to a year and a half to become enculturated with an organization. That is, to understand on such a deep level that you forget that things aren't weird anymore after about a year, because you're now a part of that culture and helping to carry out that culture. So this is Edgar Schein often says that a culture is like an iceberg in terms of his 3 levels. So you can see the artifacts, easy to see. That's 10% of what the culture is an organization. So right on the level are some subcultures, also some informal roles that you see, or start to see and start not to see. Also, some rituals and ceremonies can be right on, right there, that sometimes you can see them, sometimes not. And then you get to the level of myths and values, the socialization processes that happen in organizations. And then finally, deep down are the organization's history, the beliefs that the founders had, and then that's been carried on, the assumptions with which people act upon. So I'm going to pause here in our cultural overview and cover the rest in the next PowerPoint. Thanks for being here.